My name is Even Bolstad. I am president of the EAPM, the body linking 34 European national HR communities together. COVID released us from many of the shackles from the Industrial Revolution and the early industrialism. Among those, the low trust concept of sitting alongside each other in an office environment as if we were all assembly line workers. Office workplaces has to a much larger extent become a place to build culture, collaborate, and fulfill our social needs. This has obviously also changed power from companies to employees, and where that is relevant, from central parties to the companies, leaving much of the dialogue between the leader and the employee. For all practical purposes, COVID has indeed given us a more democratic workplace, especially for those privileged who can work from home or everywhere. Many countries have updated and renewed the legislations, but none have done that more radically than the Netherlands. I fell in love with the Netherlands as a young kid. My first football memory from 1974 World Cup finals, Johan Cruyff, Neeskens, Rensenbrink, Rudi Krol, that really impressed me as a young kid, and I am still in love with Netherlands. But more and more, I must admit, to their pragmatic approach to life and work, especially in the progressive approach the Netherlands have taken to several working life issues. For me, as a Norwegian and a Western European, Netherlands are a natural benchmark, often doing very good also when it comes to working life issues. Context matters. Therefore, just some brief facts about Netherlands and Dutch working life. Netherlands are ranked 6th in the world on productivity. They are really doing good. They have a relatively high employment rate and substantially and a low unemployment rate. I think it's 3.8% unemployment now. Compared to other Western European countries, they have a relatively low level of unionization, 18%. Such a low number usually means weak and not necessarily representative employee side in a tripartite dialogue. High level of part-time and temporary employment, that also is the case with Netherlands. I believe you are the highest within the OECD on that. And that is probably also a reason for why such a high number of temp agencies origin in the Netherlands. This probably also has to do with your legislation on dismissals, where fixed employees are guaranteed a relatively high compensation if they have to leave the company. It just isn't very attractive for employers to hire. And if you are on the inside, you are among the privileged and probably also being taken care of by the unions. Netherlands have one of the best pension schemes in the world and a remarkably improvement of absenteeism rate some years ago, which by itself could be a theme for another webinar, especially interesting for me as a Norwegian, where we are not good at all on that. And not to forget, you are ranked 8th in the world football. But today's theme is that Netherlands have made a really progressive stand on new working conditions. Today, I am sitting here at home in Oslo. It's snowing outside, and I do not at all miss that travel to the office. The theme is the right to work from everywhere. And to present this, we are lucky to have Lucas van Wees, the current MVP or Dutch representative to the EAPM. Lucas has a business career, including being Vice President HR at KLM and HR Director at the University of Amsterdam. He's a former president and my predecessor in the role as president of the EAPM, and he is currently serving as a treasurer and board member at the World Body for HR, the World Federation for People Management, WFPMA. After the presentation, there will be a Q&A facilitated by Head of Public Policy at our UK member, the CIPD, Ben Wilmot. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A button during the presentation, and Ben will pick those up. So then I will just say, veel succes en bedankt voor het delen, Lucas. Was that approximately correct in Dutch?
That's very good and much better than my Norwegian, I think. Evan. So thanks very much for this very nice and kind introduction. Also to Ben, who will facilitate the session, and to my colleagues from the EFBM, who has made this possible also, and to Sven from Norway, who is facilitating this from the technical background as well. We are together, counting from yesterday, with around 165 people from all over the place. So this is about a right to work from everywhere, but it's also a place here, a virtual place where everyone is attending. So that's really good, and I guess that is also very much a lot of interest for the topic. Well, let me go through to that topic with you in the next 20-25 minutes. And I don't know how it is with you, but talking about a new law can be rather boring. So what I did is in the next 20-25 minutes, I will cover that in like 6 small chapters, and I will try to give you the real essence of what's happening here in the Netherlands. And before I start, I think I should really talk a bit about the context which is behind all of that. And I think that Evan already spoke a few words on this. And that is that in the Netherlands, which I consider to be a social market economy, it's a rather, as you know, small country, but it is also based on the so-called polder model. And the polder is, again, another Dutch word, which means the land below the sea. And a big part of the Netherlands is below the sea. And that's already like this for a long, long time. And the Dutch built dikes, of course, to protect them from the sea, which will be an issue with the rising sea levels anyway in the future. But because of doing that, the Dutch had to work together. And this is what we call the polder model. Nobody could do this in his or her own. We had to cooperate. And that is also the story between the social dialogue in the Netherlands, between the employers and the employees. And within that context, a lot of things has been done. The Netherlands had the first multinational company in the world. I think we had one of the first big flex companies, a company called Randstad. And we pooled our money together to create big pension funds. And those are also big investors all over the place. And we did a lot of innovation, I think also in terms of labor conditions and labor deals. And within that, we will talk about the right to work from everywhere. And let's then go to the first slide then. Sven, if you can do that. So the first topic of the 6 chapters, which I will cover with you, is what is it all about? So I have to go back a bit in the history. The Dutch also created another law, which was called the so-called Flexible Working Act. And within that law, it was designed and defined how to deal with flex work. So being part-time, full-time, also the extent of the labor contract and all of that. So that was an arrangement, a lawful arrangement between employers and employees. And that has proven its worth. So the Netherlands, for instance, are, I think, the champion even in the OESO area as the #1 in part-time work. This is a much debated issue nowadays in the Netherlands because we do have a shortage of people to work. So we would like to extend this part-time work into a bit more of full-time work. But anyway, the law making that possible really created a big push in part-time work in the Netherlands as being the champion on that one. What this Flexible Working Act also regulates is how you deal with the process. So if you want to have part-time work, it regulates how you should do that. You should put in a submission to your employer that you want that. and then the employer has a certain time to react to that. And if he or she does not react to that, it is granted anyway. So that is a bit how it works. And now this law, this Flexible Working Act, is going to change. And it's going to change because with the right to work everywhere, which is a new law, it will now also be possible to discuss with your employer that you talk about the working place, where you are going to work from. And that is a new law. It was approved in the Netherlands in the House of Representatives on July 2022. And it's now into the Senate for discussion. And once that will be approved, then the law is effect. And that means that the employers and the employees in the Netherlands can do their thing on the basis of that fact. You can deal with that in a collective labor agreement or in a work staff council agreement. So you can do either bigger things than the law is saying, or you can do less, but you have to agree upon that with a collective labor agreement and with staff unions. And this is a law which is going to be true for all companies in the Netherlands with more than 10 employees. So let's go to the next slide. Why is this law in place or going to be in place? What were the reasons behind it? Well, first I have to say the initiative from this law did not came from the Dutch government. It came from two members of parliament, one member of parliament who sits in the current coalition, and the other one who is in the current opposition. And they said, we are now in the pandemic, and it's time to take the benefits of that pandemic by changing this law. Because there are so many, well, disadvantages, but also advantages to the pandemic, amongst other sickness leave. If you work a lot from home, the assumption was there will be less sickness leave, you have less travel time, the wellness of the people, that the employees gets better, and all of that. So there were many benefits related to that, and this was all behind the change of that law. So it makes the workplace a happier place, a better place, a better balanced between working and private life. It can make people more productive. I mean, if you have less travel time, you can probably also be more productive. And within this law, we can facilitate the dialogue between employer and employees about where to work from. So the essence of this new law is that working from everywhere is rather unlimited, but there are some limitations to that. Amongst others, you have to work within one of the countries which are part of the European Union. So if you want to go to Bali or to South Africa or whatever, the employer can refuse that. So why is this limited to the European Union? Well, one of them is that if you want to work from out of Portugal, for instance, you're still in the time zones of Europe, which makes it more easy because then you can relate to office times. And the other one is that there are many contracts, tax regulations between the Netherlands and European countries. So it's a nice cover within Europe to do that. So those were big reasons to limit that to the European Union. The other one to that is that, let me speak a bit about tax. That, for instance, if you are working outside of the Netherlands for, I would say, less than 183 days, which is about half of the year, then tax is still regulated and paid in the Netherlands. But if you are more than that, so if you are more than 183 days outside of the Netherlands, for instance, in Portugal, then the tax is regulated within Portugal. That's part of such a tax contract. So let's go to the next slide. Can an employer refuse a request to work from anywhere? Yes, that is possible, but not easy. Because again, like with the law on the flexible working, you have to motivate it to do that. So it cannot easily be done. So the rights of the employees are better grounded with this law. But again, it is possible to refuse it. You still have to motivate it. And there can be many reasons why not to accept it. For instance, if the work itself cannot be done outside of the Netherlands. For instance, that is obvious. If you are a pilot or a truck driver, you cannot probably apply for this kind of law. Also, you can disagree with it as an employer because the administrative burden for all of that is too big. And for instance, for smaller companies, it is can be a lot of administrative burden to regulate all of that. So the other reason to refuse it is that you feel that if somebody is for a long time away outside of the Netherlands, you don't have that social cohesion anymore with the team. And then another final thing is if it could jeopardize the secrecy of the work by working outside of the Netherlands, for instance, or by working from home. So there are reasons for that for employees to reject it, but in essence, it has to be reasonable and it has to be fair, from both perspectives. So there has to be a certain balance in the interest from both employer and employee to do that. And probably the best thing for employers to regulate this is to make a deal within the collective labor agreement or with the staff council, that you have at least a frame within you can decide on how to deal with this law. So the law is pretty new, and again, it's not yet to the Senate. It's expected to go to the Senate, but we don't expect a lot of issues with that. But let's see. But already up front, there are already some interesting moves. One of them is my former employer, KLM, already made a deal in their current new labor agreement. And they have said that for office staff, it will be possible to work with relation to this new law for 8 weeks on an annual base outside of the Netherlands. So this is a trial. It will be evaluated, but KLM is already starting with that, and that's of course very appealing for a lot of people, because as you know, I worked also a long time for KLM. You have reduced staff travel possibilities, so that can also more easily be done than I think in a lot of other companies. So KLM is one of the first big companies who is moving into this new arena. So that's, I think, very interesting. So let's go to the next one, the next slide. There's a lot of impact on employers, people managers, and HR teams to be expected, because a lot of things have to be dealt with. It cannot be dealt with within a law, so it has to be dealt with within the company, between the unions and the staff council and the employer. And then once that is done, there are a lot of things still to regulate. And also, I think, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, sorry, we covered that. Let's go to the next one. Sven, if you can. Yeah, the general feeling about it. Well, it's a bit early to say, because it's not yet an approved law. And so many people are now getting more or less awake about this new law. And the debate is already starting about all of this. And so, for instance, people who are not office workers, well, they say, well, why is this not for me? Well, this is of course the story about equity in the workforce. There are costs related to it. Who's going to pay that costs to that? So there's a lot of debate coming up, I think, on this this story. And also people are saying, why is this law actually needed? Because, for instance, if you look to the flex work or to the part-time work, I mean, there's a law, but there are a lot of things going on between employees and employees, which are dealt with in improving those issues without the meaning of a law. Because if you have a lot of trust in a company, and the Netherlands is considered to be a high trust society and a social dialogue place, you can make a deal about that between the employer and the person itself. So, so yeah, it's a new thing. It's probably not going to be rocket science, but still, I think it's of interest as part of the context in the Netherlands that this is a step forward for the social dialogue and the relations between employers and employees. And it's also picking, I would say, the benefits from the pandemic into that story. The Netherlands is a good place to do that, by the way, because it's very highly digitalized. So that really helps. A lot of our processes are automated. Also work processes are automated. So it can be done pretty easy, I think, from that point of view. So I guess we are going to enter a new phase with a lot of digital nomads, Dutch digital nomads, which you can see in the future in a lot of European countries. And by that, I would like to close at this point. I think we're right on time. And let's see where the questions come from. Thank you very much for your interest.
Thanks, Lucas. Yeah, really interesting to hear what's happening in the Netherlands. While we in the UK, we're waiting for the UK government to respond to its consultation on making flexible working the default, which is sort of a broader flexibility agenda, but really interested to hear what's happening in the Netherlands. And it seems that there's a really strong business case potentially for this, that it would certainly obviously be welcomed by lots of employees, but it sounds, that issue around high trust employment relationships, that where flexibility can flourish and you get good outcomes in terms of engagement and commitment and organizational performance. So it seems obviously a really positive rationale behind this, but you've also highlighted some potential issues that some employers might have around additional admin costs or time associated with managing people who are working in other countries. Potentially some concerns about how much control that employers might have, and that issue around equity as well, I think, is a really interesting one. When you've got people who can work remotely and have a lot of flexibility, and yet other people who have to attend a physical workplace, much less. So yeah, really interesting. I suppose just before I pick up any other questions which are starting to come through, that point that you made, the question you posed, I was going to just ask you specifically, does there need to be legislation to actually support this shift to this more progressive way of working, where people can work in different locations in different countries, much more easily than they used to in the past? Would it happen anyway, or do you need the legislation to sort of signal that this is a shift that is welcome and employers should support where they can?
Yeah. Well, this is, I would say, within the experts who are talking about this is a debated issue. So it's not, I think, still a broad issue in the Netherlands, but within the experts, it is a debate. Because once the two members of parliament took this initiative law to the House of Representatives, many of the things they said seems to be true at that time. but you could debate it if it's still true now. Let me give you an example. In the beginning of the pandemic, interestingly enough, the sickness rate in the Netherlands went down because, and the relation to that was that so many people had to work from home that in itself had an effect on reducing the sickness rate. And so in the time they put this proposal, this new proposal to the House of Representatives, this seems to be true. But now in the Netherlands, actually, the sickness rate went up. So it's now debated if there's a correlation between working from home and low sickness rate. And there is some proof that there is no relation to that. And that what actually is happening is that there's an other element to the story, which is true, probably true, and that is there is a shortage of labor force in the Netherlands, which means for the ones who are still working, there's a high working pressure on them, which is causing a higher sickness rate. So it is not then totally related to working from home, but more to the work pressure to that story. So that's one element which is now in the expert debate on this new law, that assumption doesn't seem to be true anymore. Then there's another story about the costs. And I'm not talking now on the administrative costs, but the cost. It's like this in the Netherlands, that if you work from home or from any other place, the employer has the duty to help the employer with the workplace in terms of the proper workplace, you know, like an office, a table, a correct chair, all of that. And the labor inspection can come by to your home if all of that is in proper shape, which again is a cost to the employer. Then the story was, in the start of this law, was okay, but if people work from home, they don't get travel expenses anymore from the employer. So that's again a saving cost for the employer. And also, if many people work from home, you don't need big offices anymore. So the employer can reduce again the costs of all those offices. So this is an ongoing debate also, you know, is it saving cost or is it adding cost to that story? Yeah.
Well, thanks. I'm sure some of these issues will be picked up by some of the other questions, and they're starting to come through. So if I start with some which I've come through on the Q&A, I've got a question around, which I think you did touch on. Do these new laws in the Netherlands only apply to office workers, or how does this apply to jobs, for example, in hospitals, factories, etc.?
Yeah. Well, okay. In the law, it's not said it should be stipulated to only office workers, but the reality is that it will stick to office workers because, well, for instance, if you take well, a nurse, for instance, in a hospital, that one is of course sticked and regulated and to the patients where he or she is working for. But still, it could be possible that part of that time, if you have to do administrative work, it can be done from out of home. But it would not make sense, for instance, to do that from out of Portugal. If, for instance, you have to do, let's say, a day of work with administrative work as a nurse, and then 4 days with being with the patients. So then it doesn't really make sense that you are that one day, for instance, in Portugal or Italy.
Sure.
So yeah.
So I suppose this comes down to where employers make, you know, judgments about, you know, reasonableness and fairness.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing, which is also, I think, a complex issue for employers is, suppose this is going to be extremely popular and so many people are applying for this possibility, then how to deal again with the social cohesion in the team and all of that. If suppose you have a team of with 8 people. 3 of them are working from the southern of Italy, 2 of them from Greece, and the rest from Spain or whatever. I mean, how do you then still deal with your social cohesion, with the right to instruct, which you have as an employer, and all of that? So, yeah.
Interesting. Well, and on this next question, I think we'll pick up on some of those issues. Is, you know, yeah, has there been any survey work in the Netherlands about whether employees you know, want these sort of working practices, are open to this sort of regulation, and also from employees? Is there, you know, how much demand is there amongst the workforce? You know, for, I suppose, you know, it's probably only going to be a proportion of workers who might want to go and, you know, work in, you know, Portugal or Germany or Italy or wherever. Yeah, so any thoughts, or do you have any awareness of any survey data on this about the legislation?
Yeah, there is some. Recently, and I think an interesting LinkedIn survey on Dutch employers stated that quite a lot of the Dutch employers think that the whole story on flexible work has gone too far. But the other thing is, there's a bit of a taboo from their side to discuss this with their employees. And I think it's like this, that the ghost is outside of the bottle. With the whole pandemic thing and people massively working from home. So people are now get used to these new patterns in their working and private life, that the employers cannot put the ghost back into the bottle. And the second thing is that there's, again, a shortage, as I mentioned, a shortage of employees in the Netherlands. So as an employer, if you make it too big, too much fuss about it with your employees, they might easily go away to other places. So that's another one. And the third one, and that is an assumption I'm not sure about this, is that my feeling is that this can be appealing, this new law, probably to young professionals. You know, the ones who are still, well, maybe in their 30s, late 20s, no kids, you know, a couple, that might be of interest. And to that sense, it could be more or less maybe the same group as the ones who are doing sabbaticals and make, you know, world journeys or whatever. But that is not, that's just a theory from my side, so it doesn't have to be true. No.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. I can imagine that, you know, maybe older workers who are thinking to sort of downshift and, you know, have you know, a more flexible working pattern as they move towards retirement. This sort of way of working could be really attractive potentially. Come back to this issue around sort of performance, I suppose, and, you know, does this impact on employees' performance? Or could it, or might employers be concerned about that? If employees can deliver the same or better results working remotely, why do some companies force employees to return to the office? And I mean, you mentioned social cohesion, but obviously, you know, there are some potential advantages that some people might have in terms of being more productive from working from home. Do you think it's very much thinking of, well, I mean, Lucas, I suppose, yeah. What are the sort of the issues that that employers should think about, both pros and cons around, you know, whether this is the right fit for them as an organization? Yeah.
Well, okay. First, I think there's a macro answer to that, and one of them is remote work affecting productivity? Yes or no? And that is again a big debate, a long debate, which for me no definite answers to that debate. By the way. And the second one is that from an employer point of view, I think you have to do really tailor work on this one. So there are people for which you might estimate or know that, you know, totally 100% working remotely is probably not a good idea, knowing that person. And for others, it can be a good idea. I mean, and that is also, by the way, not easy for employers to have that kind of discussion with their employees, because I mean, it could be like a random choice then what they're doing here. But then again, that's again the social dialogue. It's in a way the same dialogue to some extent as you have about full-time or part-time work or whatever. I mean, so yeah. But if you have I would say, an adult relationship, between an employer and employee, that discussion can be fruitful, and it doesn't have to be a choice forever. I mean, take the example of KLM, the pilot for 8 weeks a year, where you can do that. You can ask 2 times a year for that, but it can never be more than 8 weeks. You can test it. You can test with a person, okay, you have done it now for, I don't know, you've been for 3 or 4 weeks in Italy. And my feeling about this, that in terms of productivity, in terms of social cohesion, in terms of this or that, this is my reflection on how it went. And so that, you know, that doesn't have to be infinite and always ever true answers to that. You can experiment with it, and yeah.
I think it's a really good point, and you know, I think it also enables an employer to say, look, we have, you know, acted reasonably. You know, we are acting reasonably. We're going to pilot this. We're going to see if it works from both your perspective and as an employee and our perspective as a business, and you know, try and find what is, you know, really good balance. So I think that idea of piloting and trialing working arrangements is a really good one. Question about, do you think other EU countries will follow this example anytime soon? Any knowledge on that front, Lucas?
It's a good question. My sense would be that this could, well, we see a lot of similarity between, I would say, the Netherlands and the Nordic countries. From, I would say, a social dialect point of view. So that could be interesting. What really helps is the level of digitalization in your country. If it's a high trust society or company as well. So there are some conditions, I think it could work. And I think some European countries are more advanced in that than others. But then again, I see also some other countries where you might not think probably that things are moving there, but they are actually moving. So there are other countries in Europe which, for other elements in the social dialogue, have also made big steps in the recent future. So let's see. I mean, again, too early to tell.
Yeah. And I've got a couple of questions I'll bring together, which we've touched on I suppose some of these elements already. So the question, first question was, if the remote work is limited at some period, who decides in which period that may happen? Can the employer force that one employee should use a particular period, for example, February or March, other than in April, May? Or June, July, you know, so where does the employer sort of discretion control come in? And the other one was, you know, are there any other obstacles do you see with the new law?
Yeah, sure. Well, back to the first question. Yes, an employee comes with a proposal to relate to this new law, and then the employer has to think it over. And then he or she can refuse it, and the employer then has to balance a couple of things. First, he has to look if it's a reasonable request and is it fair. Those are the main elements in the law. And then the employer has to weigh if granting the request would mean serious problems in terms of safety, or rosters, for instance, could be an exception. Economic, technical, or operational interests. That could also be a way to accept or refuse it. And again, I was talking about administrative burdens. that can also be complicated, and that can be too much, especially for the smaller companies to deal with that. Keeping the social cohesion can be a story. If the labor itself is located to a certain place, for instance, a truck driver or that kind of stuff. And again, if it's affecting the secrecy of the job. Those are all could be good reasons to accept or reject a request. And the burden of evidence on this one is with the employer. Yeah, so he has to make that that story. So this is to the first question, and the second question. Sorry, Ben.
It was just the sort of obstacles around for the employer. Yeah, I mean you've picked. I think you've probably answered it actually.
Okay.
So question of sick leave has come up. How is sickness absence from remote workers treated in cases when the leave is paid by the company and when it is paid by the state? I don't know if you've got a particular question answer on that. And I suppose sometimes this is just a reflection from me that I think sometimes we have, or maybe people are more able to continue to work, do some work when they are working from home, rather than being signed off sick completely if they have to attend the physical workplace. And that there may be some advantages around. Obviously you don't want people to be working when they're ill, but being able to do some work if they have the capacity to do that can also be a positive thing. But yeah, that issue around sick leave and who pays when someone is working remotely.
Yeah. Well, okay. I was already talking about taxes, and this has to do with the 183 days rule. That is okay. But the other one is the other point is now indeed on social security, on sickness and all of that. Well, there are two questions to that. One of them is, okay, so again, you work in, well, let's say Italy again, and you get sick, then of course the sickness rules still apply as you would have them in your own company. But then who will check that? Well, that's another issue to be sorted out within a company, how to deal with that if you want to deal with this new law. For instance, in the Netherlands, it's like this, that after some time, if you are a long time sick, you have to make an appointment with your company doctor. But that is the same thing what happened in the pandemic times here in the Netherlands, is of course then you have a phone call with your medical doctor, with the company doctor, or you have a Zoom or a Teams or whatever. So that can easily be resolved by that. That's not really different than working from Italy or working from home. For security payment, that's another story, because, and that is again a story from country to country, but in general in Europe it's like this, that if you work let me take an average working year, which is around 210 days work days. If you are more than 25% of those 210 work days outside of the Netherlands, working from outside of the Netherlands, then the security system from the country where you are working in applies. So that's another general law. There are exceptions to that, but it's too complex for now. But so that is another story to that. That is who pays and who deals with it, who makes that arrangement. And that comes back to the administrative burden, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say another dimension to that point, that it can sort of make some aspects of managing the employment relationship more complex potentially. A question around engagement and belonging, and whether this is affected by remote work. What is the logic to increase the possibility about remote working? Is there a concern that remote work could increase attrition potentially? And I mean, you've touched on that issue around sort of social cohesion.
Yeah, it's again a good question. Okay, if you look to the whole base of employee commitment surveys, which many of that has been done during the pandemic, by the way. So you see there is some relation to that. I mean, and then I'm now talking to fully and total remote work. So not touching any more with your team physically or whatever. Then what I get from that is that yes, it can jeopardize the commitment and nutrition rates. But then again, it depends on the person who is actually doing that. So again, that this is the tailor approach, which I was tailor-made, custom-made approach again between the employer and the employee about that. And again, I think it makes sense to evaluate that with your remote workers. That if this is really something for them, yes or no. So do that on a trial basis and all of that.
Great, thanks. And just a final question, because I think we're sort of near to our the end of our Q&A. What about taxation? Isn't there a taxation issue if you pay taxes in the Netherlands and you live in another country?
Yeah, well, that goes back to the 183-day rule. So if you are more than those amount of days within another country, then you are taxated over there. And if not, you are taxated in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we've run out of our scheduled Q&A time. So Lucas, many thanks for your really interesting presentation and for your insightful responses to the questions.
Ben, sorry, one more thing.
Yeah.
Which we didn't touch, but I think what a true benefit can be into the future, if this thing works, so this new law works in the Netherlands, and people with after some trials and all of that seems to be, happy, effective, productive, committed, and all of that, I think it's a big advantage, because then you can expand your workforce while still having shortage now in the Netherlands by many remote workers to that story. I mean, you can more easily do that. And the other thing to that is that digitalization will increase. I mean, in the Netherlands, we're talking already on 5G, the next level in bandwidth. So, I mean, it will become even more easy to work remotely from a technical base as well.
Yeah.
So it can also be very beneficial to the Dutch economy and to the Dutch welfare state and to the wellness of the people as well.
I think as well, from our perspective, from the UK perspective, of those, including CRPD, who is championing a flexible working agenda, is benefits for inclusion. If you have a disability or long-term health condition, if you have caring responsibilities, then of whatever description, then this type of flexibility will absolutely enable you to recruit and support a more diverse workforce and support people's health and well-being. So very positive agenda, and I will pass back to Evan, and many thanks again.
Thank you very much. This has to do with legislation. It has to do with tripartite cooperation, as you mentioned. It also has obviously to do with company policy and the dialogue between the employer or the leader and the employee. And from my experience, practice very often runs ahead of legislation. And so I would just like to say that do not necessarily wait for legislation on this. Much can be done within the company. if you just use this window of opportunity and look upon it, as you have said, as a way of working with your employer brand and to gain some kind of competitive advantage on this. At the same time, it comes with a lot of dilemmas, and we have just scratched the surface in this webinar. And a lot of these dialogues have to be done within the national level and also within the company, adapting these new ways of work to the agenda and the possibilities you have. But you have indeed challenged us and widened our perspective on this. So I would really like to use the opportunity to thank you for that, Lucas. I'd like to thank you, Ben, for great facilitation. And behind the scenes, we have had Sven and Natalia, and supported by Beck and Kristin in London and in Oslo. And that is also a way of just seeing how can we use this opportunity to collaborate and work together in a different way, also across Europe. This webinar will be made available at the EAPM webpage as a webcast, eapm.org. The tape or digital file will also be sent to all 34 national associations if they would like it to make it available on their national web pages. So thank you very much, Lucas, Ben, Natalia, and Sven, and thank you for all of you who took your time to participate. So my last message to you is, be challenged in a positive way, but do not sit there and wait for legislation. A lot can be done at the company level. It's just to bring all these great ideas into action. But be aware, there are dilemmas, there are paradoxes in this. Just address them in advance, but do not let them stop you. Thank you very much. Enjoy your day. Go out, do a difference.